Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TFA Mayoral Youth Forum. We are really excited to have you all here. And to kick us off, I'm going to pass it off to Denise Webb.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and talk about our agenda really quickly. So we're going to do a TFA description and a moderator introduction. Then the moderator will kick us off into the form format explanation. The candidate introductions and opening statements will commence afterwards. Then the moderator will explain the question format, and then we'll have 4 Q&A sections: the long and short responses, the rapid responses, the video questions, and then the chat box questions. Then the candidate closing statements will happen, then closing remarks, and then the event will close. Okay, so welcome to the hashtag Transformation Candidate Forum series. The Transformation Alliance is hosting the series of candidate forums to give community members a chance to hear directly from the 2021 City of Atlanta mayoral and council candidates and their visions for policing, equity, mobility, health, climate, housing, and youth power. TFA is a collaboration of community advocates and policy experts and transit providers whose mission is to advance equitable transit-oriented development as a pathway to economic prosperity, opportunity, and a high quality of life for our beloved Metro Atlanta neighborhoods, especially legacy Black communities. We are dedicated to creating thriving, mixed-income communities anchored by our region's critically important transit system. Yes for Equity is a national training and movement building force built on the belief that racial equity and intergeneration power sharing is essential to creating community change. Yes for Equity believes that our collective power as youth and adult allies to achieve the change we seek in the world depends on organizing the history of structural racism that exists in the United States. We embrace the responsibility to work towards organizational and societal change in service to create a more equitable, thriving communities for all. We realize many people are working right now, so this live stream will be recorded for viewing later. Before we meet the candidates, let's meet our moderator. All of the hashtag Transformation candidate forums will be moderated by women who are influencers and change agents of civic life in Atlanta. This one is no different. I'm pleased to introduce today's forum moderator, Rachel McBride. Rachel is a community organizer based in Atlanta and Metro Atlanta areas. She's founded the Brighter Future Youth Leadership Council, formerly under the United Way, and now under the Partnership for Southern Equity. The Youth Council is a coalition of young people focused on mitigating the causes and implications of student mobility and housing instability. She also works with Yes for Equity under the racial equity lens and Sunrise movement under the climate justice lens. She does this all while being a senior in high school. We are extremely excited to have her leadership in this role and are happy to have her with us today. Welcome, Rachel.
Hello, and welcome to the Youth Mayoral Candidate Forum. For our audience, we just dropped a link to the Facebook Live event in the chat, so share the link with a friend, a family member, or a neighbor, and tell them to tune in right now to hashtag ATL Ask to hear candidates answer questions that are drawn from TFA's 6 issue areas, which are racial equity, mobility, student housing instability, youth power, climate, and policing. We will also see how these problems overlap. And if you're posting on social media, please use the hashtags hashtag Transformation and hashtag ATL Ask. That is hashtag TransFormation and hashtag ATL Ask. To qualify for participation in this forum, candidates must have a live campaign website and must have submitted the most recent campaign filing. All candidates who met this criteria were invited. As we get started, this is a friendly reminder to all of the candidates. Please mute or silence your cell phones. Candidates, we will conduct timekeeping using the Blue Sky app as follows. 10 seconds before the end of each response time, you will receive a visual cue with the timekeeper screen turning orange. At the end of your allotted response time, you will receive a visual cue with the timekeeper screen turning red and an audible cue with the sound of a bell. In order to be respectful of everyone's time and to be fair to all candidates, you will be thanked for your answer and muted if you go beyond your allotted response time. Candidates, as you give your answers, think about the complexity of the issues we mentioned. 1, how they intersect. 2, how they affect Atlantans. And 3, how you would shape your policy priorities and how these issues would also shape your policy priorities. Now, let's begin. Candidates, Please introduce yourselves and tell us what you love about Atlanta. We'll start in alphabetical order by your last name as follows. You'll have 1 minute for each response. First, we have Councilman Brown.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you all. Again, my name is Antonio Brown, and like many Atlantans, I grew up in poverty with my parents in and out of prison. I ended up dropping out of high school at the age of 15 to take a full-time job to help sustain my brothers and sisters. But I was able to will my imagination and really see beyond my environment and conditions and overcome the adversity in my life. And I launched one of my very first businesses right here in Atlanta, a men's fashion brand, into Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom's nationwide, turning it into a multi-million-dollar organization. I've had the honor of serving on the Atlanta City Council for the last 2 years, where I've passed over 60 pieces of legislation, a lot of which to address some of the most complex issues the city is currently facing. So for me, this has been an opportunity to really start shaping the conversation around creating a socioeconomic shift within our city and moving residents from poverty into our working middle class, and really lifting up our working middle class and small businesses so that we can create an inclusive ecosystem where no Atlantan is ever left behind. So this is why I'm running for mayor, and I look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And we'll pass the introduction to Councilman Dickens. And as a reminder, the prompt is introduce yourself and tell us why you love Atlanta.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Rachel, for being a great moderator. And thank you to Partnership for Southern Equity and TFA and everybody for what you're doing in the community. I'm Andre Dickens. I'm a native of Atlanta, born and raised in Southwest Atlanta, Adamsville. Went to Atlanta Public Schools, graduated, became the first in my family to go to college when I went to Georgia Tech to get a chemical engineering degree. So I'm an engineer. I like to solve problems. I like to help fix things. I also went to Georgia State to get a master's in economic development. So Atlanta has been my home. Atlanta has raised me, and Atlanta has trained me. And so some of the things that we'll get into that I want to help is make sure that Atlanta is more affordable and equitable and safe for everyone. What I love about Atlanta is the people. The people of Atlanta thrive, and they have great hearts, and they have a fantastic culture and a way about us that is undeniable, and it is contagious. Everybody wants to be an Atlantan.
Thank you. And just alerting everybody, City Council President Felicia Moore is going to be a little bit late. She alerted us beforehand, so she will join us later. But for now, we can move on. Thank you all for your introductions. So next we have a question and answer section. Candidates did not receive any questions in advance in order to ensure the most authentic responses possible. Candidates will answer a mix of long response questions, short response questions, rapid response questions, and video questions. For each long response question, you will receive 2 minutes response time. For each short response question, you will receive 1 minute response time, and each rapid response question will consist of a quick yes or no. I will indicate the question type and how much time you have to answer before and after asking the question. At the end of the forum, we will also take questions from attendees. So attendees, drop your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom or in the comment section on Facebook. Alrighty, so we're going to jump right in, and our first question is a short response question. Yes for Equity's why is that young people under the age of 18 make up almost 30% of the United States population, yet their potential as a generation to contribute to a better society is systematically ignored. Our nation is suffering economically, socially, and civilly as a result. Yes for Equity works to empower this 30% of the US population. And so our question is, how do you define youth power? Again, you have 1 minute to answer this question. We will start with Mr. Dickens.
Well, right now you have the power because you just hit us with a doozy of a question. That I think youth power is in the ability to for your voice to be heard, even at this age, for your thoughts to be valued. And youth power is also in the form of economics. And so not only is your voice and your culture, you guys are actually creating trends and a whole new language a lot of times for us to use, but really in your economics. TikTok is making millions, billions off of you. Instagram was, Snapchat was, all of our entertainment industry and other things that we do is based off of, a lot of the perception and ideology behind what happens with the under 18. So we have to give you more internships, apprenticeships, training, and jobs after school and in the summer.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Brown.
That bell was serious, by the way.
It was.
So, no, I think that, I posted this on Twitter yesterday. I was speaking about how there is a generational shift in leadership occurring, and how I believe that young people are contributing to that shift, because you all are really, you're unapologetically breaking down doors and removing barriers. And by doing so, you're forcing the human consciousness to evolve. And as it evolves, people's minds begin to open up and things begin to change. So I believe that your voice and reclaiming your power in this generation, I believe that is the epitome of our youth and how they will contribute to our generation moving forward.
Thank you all for your responses. Okay, our next question is a long response question, meaning that you will have 2 minutes to answer this. And it's also a video question. And it's asking how important youth voices are during decision making and how you plan on including them. So we will play that video now and then introduce the prompt.
When making decisions, how important are youth voices to you?
And to expand upon that, for example, during the Black Lives Matter protests, a large number of demonstrators were under 18 and thus unable to vote, but had a tremendous impact on social and civic outcomes in the city of Atlanta. And so the question I will repeat from the young lady in the video: how do you plan to include youth in future decision-making in utilizing youth power for a whole Atlanta? And we'll start with Mr. Brown.
Yeah, so many of you may or may not know this, but I led in the social justice movement right here in Atlanta. I was one of the first elected officials to actually lead a march and stand with the people. I think the New York Times captured me saying no justice, no peace. And I thought it was so important that the young people were not just given a voice, but were also at the table while decisions were being made. So I created this nonprofit organization called the People's Uprising. I'm one of the founding members, along with 56 other elected official, community organizer, activists that all care about Atlanta and how we can work together to ensure that we put an end to generational poverty, that we put an end to police brutality, that we put an end to the lack of affordable housing in our city. And the organization has done some incredible things. But I think because of the time we're in right now, it's not just young people, but people in general are no longer asking for a seat at the table. I think that we are rising up and realizing our power, and we're wielding that power, and we're creating our own table. We're not waiting on anyone to come and save us anymore. We're creating our own table, and we're inviting our elected officials to come and take a seat. And I believe that that is the future, and that is what's going to truly change things, and how we can bring our youth together and ensure that they're a part of the decisions that are going to impact them. So that's just some of the ways in which I've been able to do it, and I believe the future holds for our young people.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And I will repeat the question for Mr. Dickens. The question is, how do you plan to include youth in future decision-making and utilizing youth power for a more whole Atlanta?
Yeah, it's important to include the youth voice, and I'm glad you asked this question One thing about Antonio Brown and I, we actually went to the other youth forum at the Atlanta Public Schools. They put on a youth forum, and he and I and Sharon Gay were the only 3 candidates that attended that. So it's important to note that, you know, showing up and listening is the vital skill of leadership. And specifically as it relates to you, being present and listening and giving back feedback is what we have to do. That's why I revitalized the Atlanta Youth Commission. This was a defunct organization within the city government until I became a city council member in 2014, and I opened it back up in 2015 and 16. And so it's 30 Atlanta youth. You have to live in the city of Atlanta, Rachel, unfortunately, but it's Atlanta youth are from all the various districts of Atlanta are able to give feedback to the government through having adults and youth be able to talk through policies. And so they meet monthly. They kind of fell off during COVID, but I think they're getting their act back together, but they look at our policies, and they also give us ideas on policies that we should implement. I'll tell you one thing that was useful was when we were talking about Atlanta going smoke-free. That was a policy that I helped pass with the city council, and we said no tobacco uses in parks, in the airport, in city buildings, and outside. You have to smoke outside of a restaurant, none in the restaurants, and that was youth that gave us input on that, because youth can't smoke, but they also are burdened with secondhand smoke. So I'm talking about the Atlanta Youth Commission, and also I created a joint committee between the school system and the city, and that exists today, where 3 council members and 3 school board members get together with the youth to talk about issues.
Thank you. We have another long response question coming up. And so we're going to transition to where youth spend most of their time, schools. And the question is, how do you plan to improve the relationship between the city of Atlanta and APS and become a partner ensuring adequate funding for our city of Atlanta students? Again, this is a long response question, and you have 2 minutes to respond. We're starting with Mr. Brown.
Yeah, so one of the first things I would do is hire a chief education officer. I think we tried to do that before at the city through the mayor's office, and it really wasn't successful. And I think that we need someone that can be hyper-focused on being a good collaborative partner with our school system, APS, the Atlanta Public School System, because there's been such a disconnect in the relationship between the mayor's office and our superintendent, and the only people that have suffered are our kids, our students. And I think we've got to do a better job of ensuring that the education that they're learning is engaging and really something in which they're passionate about. I mean, I didn't have the luxury to go to college, and I dropped out of high school, but you understand the importance of education. And it's part of the reason why I created the Student Entrepreneurs of Atlanta program, was because I wanted to create career opportunities for young people in the creative arts space, like culinary arts and fashion design and interior design, and all of the things that are really cool, studio engineering, and allow them to go through this pathway where they not only can learn about these experiences, but also can focus around entrepreneurship and be able to expand some of their passion and the things that they want to do. Because I believe we have to lift up our youth, and not only lift them up, but really captivate their attention so that they stay interested in something in which they're passionate about, so that they can really have a desire to be successful. And that's why I think this program, Student Entrepreneurs of Atlanta, would be so incredible and would create so many opportunities for our young people to get involved and stay engaged.
Thank you. And for Mr. Dickens, the question is again, how do you plan to improve the relationship between the city of Atlanta and APS and become a partner in ensuring adequate funding for our city of Atlanta students?
Yeah, so right now I consider myself a great partner to Atlanta Public School System. I've really met a couple of times, actually more than that, with Lisa Herring, Dr. Herring, the school superintendent of APS. And we've had great conversations about how we can partner together as a city council member and how we partner together if I was to become mayor. So one of the things to note is Councilmember Brown and I agree that we need a chief education officer, one that is fully funded and has a staff that really works on all youth-related issues in class and out of class, things that the city can help perform a task in addition to the school system, as well as early childhood education too. Being prepared for school is important. You know, those formative years are important in pre-K, preschool as well. And so being able to really present after-school programs, entrepreneurship programs, weekend and summer events and programs are vital. And those things are usually in the hands of the city or in the nonprofits around the city. And so that's why when I created the joint commission between the city council, 3 council members and 3 school board members, that's all we talk about. That was the first time that in the city of Atlanta, we actually have a real tie-in together. And that's the one I created. We also fought very hard to make sure that Atlanta Public Schools got all of their deeds. That's something that I really was instrumental in. So on a go forward basis, I'm gonna make sure that we're data driven, knowing what pathways to possibility and prosperity are important to students, what things lead to exceptional outcomes. And that is something that is between the classes, but also outside of the classroom, like safe streets, sidewalks, crosswalks, abandoned buildings being torn down, and those things will help communities be better for kids.
Thank you. Our next question is also about schools, and it is a long response question. When we talk about schools, it's also important for us to think about post-secondary and specialized options in our schools. House Bill 444 was introduced in 2019 and passed in April of 2020. It put a limit on credit hours that high schoolers could pursue in Georgia. This made it no longer possible for students to get associate's degrees without paying out of pocket. So our question is, how do you plan to make dual enrollment accessible to students in Atlanta again in wake of House Bill 444? I'd also like to note that these changes were made on a systemic and legislative level, meaning that responsibility solely lies on lawmakers' shoulders and not the school boards or related parties. Again, this is a long response question and you have 2 minutes to respond. We are starting with Mr. Dickens.
Yeah, this is dual enrollment gave so many kids in our school system access to college that otherwise would not have had access to college, and or also help them pay for college because dual enrollment, allowed them to get access for free. I thought that was a brilliant opportunity for individuals, particularly those that were going to Georgia State or Atlanta Technical College, Atlanta Metro. So to really fight this, we have to advocate on behalf of the citizens of Atlanta to the state of Georgia. The state controls the colleges and universities. The state is over our university system, but the city's mayor can really push the envelope and advocate on behalf of our youth and our citizens and to find external funding mechanisms for that. You'll be happy to know that one policy that we have on the table right now that I just introduced along with Mayor Bottoms and others is to have a child savings account that occurs from when you're in kindergarten. The city of Atlanta will put forth money to be able to put every child and get a savings account for each child so that when they get to college, they'll have some money that they can either use for college or use for something else, for a trade or something in that regard. So I think we have to fight back with the state and come to an agreement on how we can get this House Bill 444 to not be so obstructionist, to be not such an obstruction to those that are in our city, and to find funding mechanisms that can continue to allow dual enrollment. The other part to this is, even though the state has said one thing, colleges can still make an individual decision about reducing the rate of college for local students. There was a relationship I did between Georgia Tech and APS that said all valedictorians and salutatorians go for free. Salutatorians and valedictorians go for free.
Thank you. And we're moving on to Mr. Brown. Again, the question is, how do you plan to make dual enrollment accessible to students in Atlanta again in wake of House Bill 444?
Yeah, it's so interesting you brought that up, because the Student Entrepreneurs of Atlanta program that I was speaking about is actually a dual credit program. And, you know, I think what made it so great is not only just the expense factor to our students and the cost savings that they would be able to receive going through a program like that, but just the experience of being in environments that are teaching them a higher learning, a higher education in which they can utilize and really apply in their lives every day. A lot of college students struggle financially. And before I created Student Entrepreneurs of Atlanta, I had a curriculum inside all of the art institutes nationwide called the Small Business Entrepreneurship Program. And it was a required course for students, but it really was able to give students an opportunity to have a hands-on experience that they weren't going to get just from traditional education. So I personally would advocate for the governor, who I would believe would be sensible enough to recognize the importance of this and allotting our students that opportunity. And then I would also incentivize the universities. I would really create a program and a system for universities to be incentivized if they remove barriers that allow students that would not be able to receive those credits a certain accolade within their institution. So I think that's super important too. So those are the ways where I would focus my time and energy.
Thank you. And this is going to be our next and last question for now about schools. There has been a shift in this country due to recent events in 2020. And since we have taken several steps forward as a country, some may say we've been pushed back in some places. Our prompt is, one of those places are schools where youth spend a large portion of their time. And our question is, what's your opinion on the recent ban on critical race theory? Should Atlanta allow critical race theory to be taught in local schools? This is a long response question, and you have 2 minutes to respond. We're going to start with Mr. Dickens.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, you know, we like to talk about things that have a specific title a lot of times, and critical race theory is another one of those examples. Really, you know, our major focus needs to be on equity and opportunity and justice. And so, you know, critical race theory was a college level course and discussion really in the legal community. I don't think we should ban it, but I also think that it's not, I mean, I think this is just another, you know, one of those topics that we find ourselves communicating about when we really, we can spend time on it and it's great. And yes, I don't think that we should abandon it, but I also really fundamentally believe that we should be teaching youth about all of the history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, making sure they're aware that people have taken advantage of other people and oppressed them, and now they benefit in society. And we have to really be clear about that. They still benefit in society from oppressing other people for hundreds of years, and that we have mechanisms to not, that human rights violations and civil rights violations have mechanisms on paper, but people still do it in boardrooms and back rooms. I think being critical in that regard, being thoughtful and explaining that in classrooms is important. I think training on equity and inclusion and the value of diversity and access and justice, truly training on justice and showing true justice warriors from the past and the present, all that. I mean, I don't have a name for it. I mean, you know, schools like to give things social emotional learning, critical race theory, this and that. Educators can really debate and dialogue over what's the proper title for it. I'm not an educator. I'm an elected official that really wants to create space for people to thrive and be safe and be heard. And so, yes, I think that the ban was not necessary, but I also think that we should really spend time talking about what they can learn.
Thank you. And Mr. Brown, to repeat the question, What is your opinion on the recent ban on critical race theory? And should Atlanta allow critical race theory to be taught in local schools? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I think critical race theory is so incredibly important within our educational system. The argument is that they find the content or the concepts and framework of critical race theory kind of like they see it as harmful, and they see it as divisive rhetoric, and that we shouldn't be teaching our kids that. But I believe that there is a way to teach critical race theory where folks can understand the history of this country, understand systemic discrimination, understand implicit bias, understand all of the inequalities that have occurred in this country, and still see how we as a people can come together and build policy to reshape those things, to eliminate those things from our society and culture. And I think it's so funny because I was at this forum and I was speaking about generational poverty. And after the forum, someone came up to me and said, "You're not allowed to call the baby ugly." And I was like, "What?" I was like, if the baby is ugly, I'm going to call the baby ugly, right? Because we have to recognize that until we call the baby ugly, we're never going to be able to truly move forward and heal from our past and find peace in our past so that we can grow and evolve into who we're meant to be and live within our purpose. So I say that to say critical race theory is so incredibly important to our healing process as a people, as all people, as well as it is a contributing factor to us collectively coming together and actually moving forward in our lives.
Thank you for that. We have another long response question coming up. Now we will get into the topics of transportation and transportation equity. The TransFormation Alliance advocates for equitable transit-oriented development that drives fair development and opportunity and improves transit connectivity for people throughout the Metro Atlanta region. And so our question now is to define equity. Then tell us an innovative idea you have to ensure transit-oriented development built throughout Atlanta is equitable. You have 2 minutes to respond, and we're starting with Mr. Brown.
Yeah, so I think transit-oriented development is incredibly important to the overall framework of our infrastructure and our transportation systems. I think there's no greater way than to build housing around our public transportation system, especially when we recognize that our roads are crowded, and we've got to incentivize residents to believe in public transportation again. And I think through transit-oriented developments, you can create that opportunity for the residents of this city because they have the access there. They don't have to go anywhere. And I think a lot of what I see in our city when it comes to economic mobility, or even when we talk about the equity in the projects that you see in Atlanta. Last night, we had a conversation about the Beltline and how the east side of the Beltline is being built out, and it's great and it's fabulous, but the west side of the Beltline almost feels like an afterthought, which is more the lower end communities where you can tell that the equity wasn't spread out, I believe, as it could have been, equally shared amongst communities. So everybody was growing at the same time. But those are the things that you deal with when you're facing areas that have been suffering from generational poverty for far too long. And a lot of times residents are put in positions where they have to choose between, sidewalks or a bike lane. And then we normally correlate that equity with the fact that, oh, they don't want bike lanes in their district or in their communities. That's a lie. But if you leave me to have to choose with a sidewalk or a bike lane, I'm going to choose sidewalks to make sure that the people are protected as they're commuting throughout my community. So those are some of the areas in which I would focus on, along with rail along the Beltline.
Thank you. Perfect timing. Okay, so moving on to Mr. Dickens, I'll repeat the question. Define equity. Then tell us an innovative idea you have to ensure transit-oriented development built throughout Atlanta is equitable.
Yeah, so the definition of equity is making sure that everyone has what they need to thrive and to survive and to be made whole. And that means, that if someone, that it means that someone may need more than someone else needs. So we give that person or that family more so that they can have opportunity. It's not equality where everybody gets $10. It may mean you get $12 and somebody else gets $8 and somebody else gets $6. But because the person that needed 12 got more because they needed more in order to have a balanced life and opportunity. As it relates to transit-oriented development, that is one of the single most, most impactful ways for us to provide equity and access and opportunity in this city, to build housing developments along our transit corridors at our MARTA stations, where right now we have these huge parking lots. We could make housing up around every last one of these MARTA parking lots and be able to have people live close to transit so they can get to work. Because, I've worked with the Transformation Alliance when I created the Atlanta Department of Transportation, and we talked about this. The biggest cost burdens that people have is first their housing, next is their transportation. Well, you can get rid of that if people live close to a rail station, which means they live in an amenity-rich area where then we can also have grocery stores, retail, et cetera. I want to make sure we have rail around the Beltline and all the way out to Camilton Road so that we can have people not have to drive so far. Not have to spend so much time on a bus just to get to a transit station. So transit-oriented development is huge, and it's a part of my platform. I also think that we should make MARTA free by 2035, particularly for those that live in transit-oriented developments.
Thank you. And our next question is just a continuation of this last question. On the note of equity, there are plans to redesign and expand the MARTA. Getting to and from MARTA stops is unsafe for many MARTA users. Many of our streets lack sidewalks and bicycle lanes, which is unsafe for any person that walks, uses a wheelchair, or bikes to these stations. Additionally, data shows that 78% of individuals ticketed for jaywalking are Black. So our question is, what are your plans for ensuring that transportation is safe and equitable for Atlanta residents? And we'll start with Mr. Dickens. This is a long response. Well, this is a short response question, and you have 1 minute to expand.
Wow, you just asked 3 questions in 1 minute. So what we have to do is prioritize small projects that make a big impact. And what I mean by that is sidewalks within 1 mile of transit centers, within 1 mile of every school and senior centers. We've already started that conversation. I put forth legislation for the Department of Transportation to look at sidewalks around every senior center and school to make sure that they're there, but also that they're in good condition. And also speed dampening devices, traffic calming devices, whether that's speed humps or what have you. And then we have to maintain and clean up the bike lanes. We have bike lanes in places that the stripes are old or they need to be swept up because they have debris. So that's doing small projects that make a big impact. And then, like I said, we have to reduce our dependency on cars anyway, which is something that's why we want to have transit-oriented development. And so I think making sure that within a half mile of all of these amenities, having bike lanes, having sidewalks be taken care of. And this is going to be important for this infrastructure bill that's coming from the federal government right now. So $1 trillion, and Atlanta's going to get a large amount of it. Being thoughtful in how we use that for our roads and sidewalks is important, particularly around schools.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to Mr. Brown. Again, the question is, what are your plans for ensuring that transportation is safe and equitable for Atlanta residents?
Yeah, I think that we have to start really being a lot more proactive in our development. And I think that when you begin to be more proactive, then you can prevent things from happening, and you can ensure that you have the resources that are necessary in order to make sure folks that are trusting our public transportation system or our bus rapid transit or, our bike lanes in this city, that they're going to be safe if they're traveling in them. And I think that starts with building comprehensive transportation networks. I think that we have an opportunity to take bus rapid transit and expand it into networks through all of our communities within the city of Atlanta, and really create and fund a project that not only could explore it, but could develop it. And I think we can do the same thing with protected bike lanes and really advancing technology around the bowlers that keep our bike lanes safe. So this is really where I would focus my energy and attention.
Thank you. And we've had another one of our panelists arrive in the time since we asked this last question. And so we would like to welcome City Council President Felicia Moore and allow her to introduce herself. And we have one introductory question for her before we continue.
Okay. What was the question? I can add it, or you want me to do it separate?
Our first thing is an introduction. So we're just asking everybody to introduce themselves and tell us why they love Atlanta in 1 minute.
Okay. Well, my name is Felicia Moore. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm running between meetings and I want to be our next mayor of the city of Atlanta. I was drawn to Atlanta when I was a senior in high school and traveled through here, and have always defined Atlanta as a place I want to be. It is full of great people, great nightlife, great things, and it's just a great city, and people think so very highly of it across the country. And I want it to continue to be that way. So I'm running for mayor to make sure every neighborhood is safer in our city, so that people can feel safe and want to come, and keep our brand good so that people aren't thinking bad about it across the city. I want to make sure our service delivery is better so that we keep our city fresh and clean and things running and operating correctly. And I want to make sure that our brand is known as a city that is not full of corruption. I want to make sure that we're transparent about what we do. I want to make sure that we're ethical, and I want to make sure that we're accountable to people that we serve, and that we hold people accountable if they don't serve correctly. I've been a neighborhood president, MPU chair, aide to a council member, a 5-term city council member, and now president of council. And I want to continue to serve our city as mayor of Atlanta.
Thank you. And I'm going to tell you this now and remind everybody else. We have a blue sky timer here that will ring a bell whenever your time is up. And in the sake of good timekeeping, we're going to have to cut off anybody that extends past their allotted time. And so a quick refresher, we have short questions, long response questions, rapid fire questions, and video questions. Long response questions, you're allotted 2 minutes. For short response questions, you're allotted 1 minute, and rapid fire questions are yes or no, and we haven't gotten into those. And we will move into our next question. Thank you again, Ms. Moore, for being here. Alrighty. So, young people have expressed issues with being placed back in schools while we are still in a pandemic. Many schools and school systems are refusing to shut down. Last April and May, peers of mine and myself had to have conversations with our school district, which is Clayton County, to make sure they knew we didn't feel safe to return. This was received well, thankfully, and bought us some more time to wait out the pandemic. And our question is, how can students have more input on having to go into schools in a potentially dangerous environment, and what possible alternatives are there to make students feel more safe? This is a long response question, and you have 2 minutes to respond. We're starting with Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I think that, as we stated before, I think it's important that our youth are not asking for a seat at the table, that they build their own table and folks are invited to take a seat. And I think through that, allowing our youth to be able to influence the decisions being made. I also would advocate on the state level with the governor to ensure that his boards that would affect our youth are inclusive, ensuring that he's appointing young people to these boards. so that they can have a voice. I would work with our philanthropic organizations and a lot of the folks in our community to ensure that you guys are not just, voicing your concerns, but you're also shaping legislation and policy within this city and state. The other thing that I think is incredibly important is that our young people are empowered to lead movements. We've seen the power that has had, throughout the country, and how our young people have led so many great initiatives in which greatness has come from and have awakened so many people. And I believe that those are the opportunities that, as mayor, we have to continue to fuel and continue to empower and continue to lift up so that we can ensure that our young people, again, are not just, influencing decision, but they're also shaping policy in this state and country. So thank you for the question.
All righty, thank you, Mr. Dickens. Our question is, as a reminder, how can students have more input on having to go to school in a potentially dangerous environment? And what are possible alternatives to make students feel more safe? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for that question. As stated before in our earlier remarks, I think kids having, the students being able to articulate and share their vision for their own education, their vision for their safety, their thoughts about their environment and what they're doing in school and out of school is critically important. That's why the Atlanta Youth Commission, I revived that. And that's why I like to make sure that we always interact with youth because, their voice, your voice as a student is important. I'm actually very proud of Atlanta Public Schools. I know you mentioned Clayton County and I think Cobb County and some others have had a whole lot of back and forth. Atlanta Public Schools made some decisions and they were tough. There's difficult parts to this because some parts of town wanted kids to go right back to school and some parts of town said no, particularly last year, no, I don't want my student going to school. And some kids didn't want to go to school and some did. So I remember surveys for my daughter and I remember, various questions being asked of parents and family members and of the students themselves about, do you feel safe going back to school? Do you want to go to a staggered schedule, A schedule, B schedule, alternating days, having virtual days and in-person days? This is something we've never experienced before in terms of a pandemic. So I think surveys and questions and following the science, wearing masks and requiring mask mandates during class is important to keep everybody safe because some people live at home with, particularly in our communities, you may have multiple generations in your same home and some people may be immune compromised and have pre-existing conditions that make them more susceptible to death or harmful, time in hospitalization due to COVID. So I'd just like to say that I think Atlanta Public Schools did a good job and I was right there with them and supporting Lisa Herron in those decisions and fighting back some of those people that had some negative things to say.
Thank you. And Ms. Moore, it is now your turn. As a reminder, the question is, how can students have more input on having to go to school in a potentially dangerous environment? And what are possible alternatives to make students feel more safe? You have 2 minutes to answer this question.
Yeah, so for them to have more input, that means that particularly in our case here in Atlanta school system, that they would need to have a seat at the table. I know we talked about making the table, but I'm sure there are student councils and other groups, and particularly high schools or middle schools, where I believe the school board and the school system will need to ask for their input and be welcoming of their input, because it's actually them that are the students that are the ones that are in that environment. Because school is a congregate environment and everyone is in the school, there's going to be a lot of difference of opinions as to what should happen, whether should people wear masks or not, in terms of alternatives. Certainly, I'm sure the school system could look at how you could adequately distance people. And I'm sorry, I'm bumpy. These roads in Atlanta are bumpy. Where they can look at, alternatives, particularly when the weather is good. If maybe there may be classes outside, maybe some of the gymnasiums can be used in places where people can adequately space, and maybe other alternatives if it's feasible with the space where, students who will choose to wear masks can wear masks, and other areas where those who choose not to can also be served as well. So I think that, there's a lot of creative solutions, and we should look to the students because they're the ones who have to abide by whatever rules of school boards or the school superintendents have. And I think they should be making those decisions fully with listening to the students as well as the parents in making those decisions.
Thank you. And on the note of safety in schools, it's not only a concern from a public health point of view. Policing in schools is also a concern, as policing is a concern everywhere. Now we are bridging the gap between school and policing. Especially with problems regarding police and police training, some think that having a police presence in schools makes students feel less safe. And so our question is, which is a short response question, by the way, what is your opinion on SROs or student resource officers in school? This is a short response question and you have 1 minute to respond. We are starting with Ms. Moore.
Atlanta Public, we as the Atlanta Police Department used to be the police department and through our resource officers in the schools. And our Atlanta School Board in our last term, they decided that they wanted to have their own officers because there were some concerns about how officers were interacting with students. And so now they have their own police force, so to speak, within the department. And I'm sure that they will be sensitively training them on how to best deal and interact with students. And that was one of the reasons why they wanted to separate it from having a contract with our APD officer. So in Atlanta Public Schools, that's not an issue.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Mr. Brown. And again, the question is, what are your opinions about SROs or senior resource officers in schools? This is a short response question. You have 1 minute to answer.
Yeah, I believe I personally believe in them. I believe that they could have much success if done properly. I enacted one of the first community policing units on MLK and Lowry. And we were able in 4 months to reduce crime in this area by 57% and rebuilding the trust between our police and community. And I think one of the most important factors of that was really the officers getting out of their vehicles and getting to know the people in which they were serving. And I think if we can look at resource officers the same way, and maybe they're trained and skilled in areas of like mental health and counseling and quality of life issues, then they could really help lift up our young people and empower them rather than having police officers enforce laws or criminalize them.
Thank you. Mr. Dickens, the question is, what is your opinion on SROs or senior resource officers in schools? This is a short response question and you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, right now in the city of Atlanta, we have the Atlanta Public Schools PD. They have their own police department that are in the schools and around the schools. So they're similar to what the resource officers used to be. And I guess they are resource officers in that regard, but they're actually belong specifically to the school system. What I think about them is, I believe that all policing, whether it's the city or the school system, should be on a serve and protect mentality. So the mentality is to serve, to come there just like everybody else comes to the job each day at the city schools, is to say, I'm here to serve, I'm here to help, and to protect in the event that something is out of order that needs the protection of the police. And so I think this is all helpful when we talk about social emotional learning, behavioral health issues that occur within the school system, not being to strike and to hurt and to think of someone as in needing law and order. We need to make sure that police in the school system are always thinking about serving and protecting, just like we want our APD officers on the street to think that way and not to be Rambo with a badge and a gun.
Thank you. And our next question is a long response question, and is also related to policing. The question is, last year, Atlanta City Council, with a vote of 8-7, nearly withheld $73 million from the APD budget in order to fund alternatives. How do you plan to use your position as mayor to manage police funding? How will this funding be used to both serve people and provide policing alternatives? This is a long response question, and you have 2 minutes to respond. We're starting with Mr. Dickens.
Man, this is the deepest forum ever. I love your questions. So yeah, I was one of the 7 that voted to look at how we could change our policing and to look at the standard operating procedures, what we actually ask our police officers to do, to look at the training. And so when we were looking at withholding, it was to withhold for 6 months, not police salaries, not anything directly for the officers, but to withhold extra funds so that we could look at the overall model of policing in the city. Do we need officers doing some of the tasks that we have officers doing right now? We need officers to be able to respond to violent crime, to mischief that is happening that causes people property or personal damage. But someone experiencing homelessness, someone experiencing a mental health breakdown, some domestic disputes that are just, in the street that are just not violent or anything like that, someone that's public drunkenness, public urination, and all these other crazy things that you see that happen, they may not need a police officer at every intervention. We need a non-emergency force, and that force could also be 24 hours. So that's what the conversation was to be held, but we didn't pass that law. It didn't pass 7-8. And so the city is still going to look at those things when I'm mayor, is to see, hey, we love our police officers and want to support them, but also we want to hold them accountable, but also not put them in situations where they're not really trained to be successful, as a specialist would be, a task force of specialists that know how to solve homeless issues or mental health issues. Our unsheltered population needs someone that will help them get on the pathway to self-sufficiency and solve their issues, versus a police officer that may not be as experienced in doing anything other than locking them up. And so I think that was what we were going for.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Moore, and our question again is, how do you plan to use your position as mayor to manage police funding, and how will this funding be used to both serve and provide policing alternatives?
Thank you for the question. So, as mayor, you will have the opportunity of developing a budget for the city of Atlanta. And so we want to make sure, no matter whether it's police or any department, that they have the adequate funding they need to do their job. In terms of alternatives, there are a lot of things that I'd like to see happen. One was briefly mentioned. Cahoots is a forum that's being done in Eugene, Oregon, where they have professionals, mental health and behavioral health specialists, who are on call just like the police, 24 hours, 7 days a week. They can respond to people who are having behavioral or mental health issues. And that is a great alternative to our police officers. I talked to many of them. They don't want to have to respond to that. They know that they're not adequately trained. And as we know in examples in our communities, that sometimes that has not bode well for the person who has been approached by the police or apprehended. So we can use that as an alternative. Other alternatives that we can use is to make sure that we are funding our police athletically, expanding those programs so that they can do more in the community. They work really well in the community, building those relationships with the community, putting it into relationships with the community. I would love to see officer-friendly program come back. We can work with our school system, and our middle school and elementary school kids can interact with a police officer in a friendly way, other than when they are seeing someone being arrested or seeing them engaging in that type of police forcing. So there are many other things that we can do with our police officer funding other than just locking people up or arresting people. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last panelist to answer this question will be Mr. Brown. The question is, how do you plan to use your position as mayor to manage police funding? And how will this funding be used to both serve people and provide policing alternatives?
Yeah, so, I authored the legislation to study the establishment of the Department of Public Safety and Wellness. And the wellness component would be a new division of non-emergency response that would report into an overall commissioner of the police. So it would be the commissioner, and then it would be the chief of police, the chief of fire, and the chief of this non-emergency response unit. And this unit would basically be a 24-hour response team that goes out into the communities, and really from a preventative and proactive basis of helping to really work with our residents before their circumstances become egregious, where they find themselves either unsheltered without opportunity to move into a shelter, or they're on the verge of being unsheltered. I just think they have so many opportunities to address mental health and substance abuse, and really focus on the quality of life issues that, as many of the other candidates have stated, our police are not skilled and trained to do. That's not what they should be focused on. They should be focused on addressing egregious crimes. I voted to pass the legislation to reallocate the funding because it was obvious that our policing system was broken. And statistics show that we have over 1,600 officers. That's more than the state, national, and peer city average. So it's not a deficit of officers, it's how we're restructuring our public safety system. So we're maximizing the outcomes of our officers to ensure we're addressing where their area of focus and skill set is. So that's where I would align my attention.
Thank you. And we have an expansion upon this question, which will be a short response question. And so we've had some talks about, reallocating funds for alternate solutions. And the state has cut budgets for social services for the past several years. And so we're asking, how are you going to make sure that mental wellness services are funded and that the resources are available for them to be funded moving forward if these are alternatives to traditional policing? And we'll start with Mr. Brown.
So it's interesting, right? I'm creating this, or I've developed this idea, this concept called the Beloved Village, which would be a mixed income community of tiny homes that we would build through modular development. And at the center of it would be a third party service provider like Mercy Care. And I've been working with the CEO of Mercy Care so that they can create satellite offices all across Atlanta, where they would offer healthcare, dental services, counseling, substance abuse. And we could create this model through modular development, which is prefabricated manufacturing, and we can build these satellite offices, and they only charge us $1 million a year to run this facility. And it's a paying scale model where if you're low income, you receive the services for free. And we can literally build these across Atlanta and offer free healthcare and dental services, as well as counseling and substance abuse training to our residents.
Thank you. And I'm going to move on to Mr. Dickens. Again, the question is, how are you as mayor going to make sure that mental wellness services are funded and that resources are available for them to receive funding? You have 1 minute.
Yeah, so this is a what we call a regional issue, and one that needs to be addressed within the city, but also with our partners, Fulton County, the state of Georgia, and the feds. I mean, it's a shame that over the past 25, 30 years, the government, the state and the feds have not funded mental health support. So we all sit in cities, and cities have to do the work of what the county would normally do. The county's role is health and human services, by the way. I know we're having a conversation with mayoral candidates, and I do have a plan for mental health, but I did want to make sure I educate the public that the health side of all this is not always just in the city, but we see the mayor on TV, so we talk to that person. But what I would like to be able to do is use a housing first model. People that are on the street experiencing homelessness, that are having mental challenges, we want to make sure that they get into a home first. And that means hotels and motels for 30 to 60 days to quickly triage their situations and get them the help that they need, and then move them into transitional housing, and then hopefully into a Georgia Works, First Step Staffing, or a Goodwill program where they can get a job.
Thank you. Ms. Moore, your response. Again, the question is, how do you plan to use your position as mayor to make sure mental wellness services are funded and making sure that resources are available for that funding to happen? You have 1 minute.
So using the position of mayor is exactly what I intend to do. Again, you know, health and human services are state as well as county level functions, not a direct responsibility of the city of Atlanta. Where we can find additional funding that we can put in that area, we will. But the most thing that I can do as mayor is use the bully pulpit of mayor and go and sit in the governor's office and the leadership under the Gold Dome and advocate for more mental health services. Work with my partners in the region through Atlanta Regional Commission, which I sit on, to help us all collectively ask for it. And then also work with our state, Georgia Municipal Association, cities across the state, work with them. And then on the national level, so you use your voice and you use the gravitas of your position to advocate for what you want and get those resources to your city.
Thank you. And our next question is a short response question. And we're going to transition into talking about student housing instability, or in other words, student mobility. Student mobility is the movement of students and families from home to home and thus school to school within one school year. And so we're asking you to give a specific example of how you will mitigate student housing issues in Atlanta. This is a short response question. You have 1 minute to respond, and we're starting with Mr. Brown.
Thank you so much. You know, it's so interesting that you asked this question today. I'm literally coming from the campus of Clark Atlanta University and the AUC. And right now there are students that are protesting the AUC because of the terrible conditions of their housing, where there's mold and, you know, things don't work, and just the condition is very poor over there, to the point where the students have decided to camp outside. And I think this is why, you know, the relationship of a mayor and our partners like the AUC is so important, because we can come together and see how we could potentially fill the gap in the need of resources and opportunities to ensure that the students are being properly housed and that they have opportunities to be able to thrive and prosper while they're, you know, really there to learn an education and not have to be protesting the conditions of the institution that they're a part of. So I think those are moments in which the mayor can empower and offer their assistance in fixing.
Thank you. And our next person to answer will be Mr. Dickens. And the question is to give a specific example of how you will mitigate student housing issues in Atlanta. This is a short response question. You have 1 minute to answer.
Yeah, so I looked at this recently, because student mobility actually is one of the biggest correlators to student educational outcomes. Students that have to move 2 and 3 times a school year often have a challenge in meeting the expectations of the teachers, that they continue to go to different schools, sometimes in and out of district. And it's all related to housing affordability in most cases. Parents end up leaving or getting evicted from one place, and they're going wherever they have first month or half month free rent. So what's happening in schools is affected by what is happening inside of someone's apartment or home as they're getting evicted or challenges. There are schools, my goal is to make sure that we get what looks like about 15 to 16 schools that have above 33% mobility. We have some schools like Kimberly that's about 45% mobility. We have to provide stability in these families and provide that through a relationship between the city and the school system. So as mayor, I will take that on to get us below 33% at all schools.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Moore, your response to giving a specific example of how you would mitigate student housing issues in Atlanta. You have 1 minute.
So yes, I will give a couple. One, we've got to work to make sure that parents are able to stay creditworthy and able to not have to be evicted from their home. And that means that they need to have livable wage jobs at minimum, but above minimum wage jobs. And so one of the things I really want to do is work with our unions to see if we can get more people into apprenticeship programs so they can earn some jobs that are skilled trades that can get them that income. And then eventually work to help them get into home ownership where they can have stability and be in a particular location versus many different locations. I can't see the clock, but also I want to make sure that we are working to build affordable housing in the city to give parents options that they can get into and that they can afford and stay in so that their kids won't have to be uprooted every time they run into a financial situation and not able to pay the rent and have to move.
Thank you. And Blue Sky had some technical issues, so we're transitioning over to using the timer on YouTube. So that should be resolved soon. And we have an expansion upon this question as well, which is another short response question. And it is, what is your plan for keeping families, specifically students, in their homes long term? And we're starting with Mr. Dickens. You have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, this is important. I mean, it really ties into mobility. Like I said earlier, people are leaving because they can't afford the rent. And so that's a two-part problem. One is the cost of rent and the housing or mortgage, and the other is income. And that's why I'm really focused on affordable housing and making sure that we preserve people's housing at the price range that they can afford it. So that means keeping our tax increases low by freezing the tax assessment. If you did not have a transaction on your property, no matter what's happening in your neighborhood, your taxes shouldn't increase by the amounts that they're having to increase due to assessments these days. So that'll help families stabilize, but also increasing incomes by giving people opportunities to get technology training, like I do with my Tech Bridge program that trains people for free in high skills technology careers so they can make $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. I train low income people for free. And that's something that we have to do is help people get higher incomes.
Thank you for that. Next, we have Ms. Moore. And again, the question is, what is your plan for keeping families, specifically students, in their homes long term? You have 1 minute to respond.
Well, to keep them in there long term, I think it's just an example of what I said. One, we've got to help if we can to get them their pay, that they can keep up with their rental costs or their home ownership costs, hopefully getting them into home ownership and getting them in a stable environment that they can stay in the home. Most of them are being put out of homes, again, because of eviction. So we need to work with them on credit worthiness, making sure that they're able to keep their credit up and even giving assistance if necessary to help them be able to make those payments so that they can stay if they're having a rough patch. I think there are things that we can do and we are doing and we will continue to do as a city when I'm elected mayor.
Thank you. And our last responder will be Mr. Brown. Again, the question is, what is your plan for keeping families, specifically students, in their homes long term? You have 1 minute.
Yeah, I think the most important factor in stabilizing communities is that we've got to get to a point where we're building generational wealth. And I think the way that you build generational wealth is really focusing on areas where we promote home ownership, because that's the closest asset that I think community has to wealth. And I think if we have better programs that can move families into home ownership by educating them and providing them access to technical assistance and, just really understanding financial literacy and credit and all of these things, I think that you'll have more families being able to sustain, and then providing them access to living wage jobs where they can make $20 an hour learning about something in which they're passionate about could all contribute to not just stabilizing the community, but creating long-term sustainability.
Thank you for your responses. We're going to move on now to a long response question that is also about housing. In regards to housing, many neighborhoods in Atlanta started as white neighborhoods, were decentralized, and are now inhabited by working class people of color. Many citizens of these neighborhoods are worried about gentrification due to an increase in development. So our question is, what steps will you take to prevent displacement and ensure students and their families can benefit from new investments in their communities? This is a long response question, and you have 2 minutes to respond. We're starting with Ms. Moore.
Ms. Moore, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, either you have to repeat the question or start with someone else. I was just transitioning to the house.
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Brown then. You're muted.
Can you repeat the question one more time? My apologies.
Yes, I can. The question is, I'll just repeat the entire thing. In regards to housing, many neighborhoods in Atlanta started as white neighborhoods, were decentralized, and are now inhabited by working class people of color. Many citizens of these neighborhoods are worried about gentrification due to increase in development. Our question is, what steps will you take to prevent displacement and ensure students and their families can benefit from new investments in their communities? And you have 2 minutes to respond. We're starting with Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I think that, due to the rising costs of land value throughout the city of Atlanta, that development is incredibly expensive. And part of what I speak about when I say we have to stabilize communities, it means that we have to lift these communities up, and you have to lift them up out of poverty. And the way that you do that is you provide them access to a living wage job that would create sustainable conditions around them. Because, affordability is relative, right? It's not an issue necessarily of whether or not, an individual can own a home and sustain a home, or rent a home and sustain a home. It's what are their conditions to be able to do that long term? And how do we create it where we can create programs that are inclusive of our residents, and we can really focus on building housing at a faster speed than which we're building. The reason why we're in a crisis is because outside of just the affordable housing component, we're not building fast enough. So we've really got to focus on modular development so that we can build more housing. And in addition to building more housing, focusing on affordable housing that's being built on city-owned land. Right now, we own 758 acres of vacant land that we can build modular on. And that we can really increase the affordable housing base in Atlanta to create opportunities for all of our residents to be able to enter into these programs and be successful and thrive through a living wage job as well.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Ms. Moore. Again, the question is, what steps will you take to prevent displacement and ensure students and their families can benefit from new investments in their communities? You have 2 minutes.
Well, and it depends on how the displacement is place. I hope you can see me. Okay. In terms of displacement, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It may be from the fact that they are unable to pay the rent. That is where we can maybe come in with some assistance to help them. If it is the home mortgage or property taxes, we certainly want to look at an anti-displacement fund so that everyone across the city will be able to use it. It's worked in some Vine City, English Avenue area, and maybe we have an emergency fund in situation to help people so that they're not displaced. I think we also got to help provide either like a legal aid society or others with funds so that they can work in partnership with us, or find a way that we can also offer more money to those organizations, because a lot of issues can be remedied through the legal system to help keep people from being losing their homes, and also making sure that we educate people so that they're not, if there are homeowners, falling victims to scams or speculative developers who are out there trying to take their property for pennies on a dollar. I believe there are many opportunities in different ways that people can be displaced. We can also look at a legacy homeowner, either assessment or an increased exemption for their property taxes, which is a high rate of building. And then we got to work with our Public Service Commission, as well as the City of Atlanta's water, and making sure that we can keep utility rates low, because people are also a very utility burden. So that adds to the cost of either them being in a homeowner or being a renter as well.
Thank you. Our last responder will be Mr. Dickens. And again, the question is, what steps will you take to prevent displacement and ensure students and their families can benefit from new investments in their communities?
Yeah, it is vital and very important to have development without displacement. This is critical for us to discuss, because a lot of times people think, hey, it's just, gentrification just happens, and it's because people in these communities didn't want new development to happen. No, people in all communities want a grocery store. They want groceries. They want job centers where they can actually work at. They want, we all want, some form of medical or healthcare facilities nearby in need of an emergency or in need of any other situation. We want full communities, access to fresh foods and restaurants, but we want those developments without displacement. We don't want abandoned homes and vacant homes around us. So what do you have? You have to have community benefits agreements when there's large scale projects occurring. And I've been instrumental in trying to put some of those in place as developments have come across my desk and across the city's plate. For instance, when we talk about Grove Park with Microsoft, Microsoft is not getting any financial incentives from the city of Atlanta, but I've told the president of Microsoft, it's not just that you need to build buildings in Atlanta. We need to make sure that Atlantans are actually going to be in your buildings, able to work and thrive and get great access to high paying jobs. That's why I train people to go to those jobs, so that you can make a whole lot of money and maintain your home and actually be able to do a lot of more great things in the city of Atlanta. And so we have to educate our population as well about, their property rights and heir property. So if someone passes away, these things don't just go to probate court. They actually can pass down in wills and trusts. I want to make sure that everybody has access to a will and a trust for their property, particularly in these areas that are gentrifying. Working with NACA and other organizations to help people refinance their houses so they can be more affordable. So those are some of the things I would do.
Thank you. And this next long response question is a video question. And the video will be asking, what will you all do with this environmental crisis? So we're going to play that now.
What are you going to do with this environmental crisis?
That was to the point. While city mayors don't manage healthcare, they are responsible for policies that affect people's health. Climate change is getting worse, and young people have to deal with the brunt of it. And so our question is, what are your plans to improve Atlanta's grade F air quality, especially in the era of the Green New Deal? This is a long response question, and you have 2 minutes to respond. We're going to start with Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I think where we have to start is really rebuilding the trust between our residents and our public transportation system, so that we can begin incentivizing residents to take public transportation and eliminate that carbon footprint with so many cars on the roads in our city. I believe that the MARTA board has to become a reflection of its ridership. I'm not sure how they could be making decisions and they don't really ride MARTA. I also believe that we've got to focus on infrastructure that could support walkable communities or communities in which will allow a public transportation system to really be effective, where folks are not having to choose between driving in a vehicle and it taking them 15 minutes as opposed to 45 minutes through our public transportation system. So I think these things are going to be critical to the success of our long-term sustainability. And I also believe that, residents are at a place where, because the equity hasn't been equally shared through the various transportation projects that have come into our communities, I think that folks would rather put their investment in other places. And I think that we have to show the residents that by investing in Beltline Rail, that it's going to be a great way to contribute to economic mobility in our city and really get our residents to and from essential locations. So I think all of these things are really critical to the overall success and rebuilding that trust so that folks take public transportation and are not constantly taking their vehicles everywhere, contributing to the carbon footprint that's affecting our environment.
Thank you. And our next responder will be Mr. Dickens. And again, the question is, what are your plans to improve Atlanta's grade F air quality, especially in the era of the Green New Deal?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm a chemical engineer, so I know a little bit about climate change, and that climate change is very serious. And I fully support the city's commitment that we've made already to be 100% clean energy by 2035. I voted for it, and we need to double down and really actually get serious about doing even more about that. We must expand our environmental policy and take it out of its silos that it's in right now, but it needs to expand to every part of our city. So the only way to really truly combat climate change is for our sustainability and our resiliency policies to reach every facet of our government. And so one thing is that Atlanta experiences an energy burden that's 25% higher than the national average, meaning that we pay more for utilities than the national average. So I'm committed to clean energy investments like weatherization, energy efficiency, rooftop solar, and community microgrids because they all work. And this is all part of actually the Partnership for Southern Equity's Just Energy Plan that we talked about. And so we have to reduce our car dependency, which is why I created the Atlanta Department of Transportation. And I support the expansion of MARTA with more MARTA and doing light rail around the Beltline, which will help students too, because 22 schools are connected. And this is a way to get people out of their cars. I want Atlanta to be public transit, our public transit to be free by 2030, 2035 if possible. This is important because that's the biggest way for us to create equity and to reduce our carbon footprint and our air emissions. And so that's why we have to continue to focus on mixed income, transit-oriented, affordable housing throughout the city, because that will reduce our impact on developmental hazards in our environment. So, and then last but not least, these are great paying jobs. Whenever we do green jobs, those jobs tend to pay about 25% higher than other traditional jobs.
Thank you. And our last responder will be Ms. Moore. And again, the question is, what are your plans to improve Atlanta's grade F air quality, especially in the era of the Green New Deal? You have 2 minutes.
So thank you. Climate change is a very serious issue that we all have to play our part in. And as Mayor, I want us to make sure that all of the great plans that we have said that we're a part of, that we implement those. Specifically as it relates to air quality, certainly getting more cars off the road and getting our car-centered culture in Atlanta to change to that of transit, which is going to take a lot of work because transit needs to be able to take you where you want to go, when you want to go, and in a very efficient and convenient manner. But there are also other areas, inflection points of air quality, particularly like the area that I live off of Donald Holly Hollowell Parkway. We have a major truck terminal where people, well, not terminal, but we have a place where they come for a truck stop. trucks and diesel fuel are very dirty fuels. And when you have them concentrated in one area, or you have a lot of truck traffic going through a particular area, it can affect air quality. And so we need to look at where these places are going, where they're being sited. Also look at any of our smokestacks that we have in an area to make sure that we're making sure that the state is staying on top of them and making sure that they're lowering their emissions. I'm proud to say that I was able to get a incinerator in my area of one of the wastewater treatment plants, and this happened in others where we were burning sludge to get them to not burn that, because all of these things that are in the air certainly exacerbate asthma, which is very prevalent in the African American community, and other respiratory issues. So we need to work on air quality, but we're going to have to do it with the state and making sure that they also have a good emissions policy.
Thank you. And our last question of this section is as follows, and we'll have our rapid response questions next, and then closing statements. This shouldn't take long, and we should be able to end at 6:40. Alrighty, so our last question in this section is, as the city seems to see the water boys and water girls as a threat instead of an opportunity, what is the long-term solution to regulate and subsidize the water boys and water girls as legitimate entrepreneurs? This is a short response question, and you have 1 minute to respond. We're starting with Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Well, I'm the council member that passed unanimously on city council legislation to look at establishing a water bottling and distribution enterprise where we could leverage the city water and actually create an opportunity for these young entrepreneurs not to just sell water, but really understand the full entire business of creating a water bottling and distribution company. But in addition to that, I think it's incredibly important that we're helping to move them into opportunities in which they can make some money. I think many of them are struggling and come from broken households in which they are the sole provider for. And you know, I remember growing up, I was a water boy, except selling water, I was selling candy. You know, so there is no difference. I just think we need to start shaping this opportunity around these young people and empowering them with the entrepreneurial mindset that they need so that they can create opportunities of success for themselves.
Thank you. And Ms. Moore, you will be on our next responder. The question is, as the city seems to see the water boys and water girls as a threat instead of an opportunity, what is the long-term solution to regulate and subsidize the water boys and water girls as legitimate entrepreneurs? You have 1 minute.
So first and foremost, we have to understand that selling water in an intersection and in the way that it's being done is unsafe for first those kids who want to provide the service, and even for those who are driving in the cars. And so what we need to do is make sure that we get our youth employment program back up and running in the summer so we can provide them opportunities. Kids want to make money, and we need to have good, safe options for them. We can also work with other partners to see if we can allow them, if that's what they want to do, is to sell water. They can do that at some of our, maybe our major festivals like the Jazz Festival or other festivals that we have in our parks where they can provide water to people that are in the parks, thus keeping them out of the streets and out of harm's way and in a more organized fashion. So I think there are opportunities to do that, but we just need to provide the opportunities to allow them to make money, whether it's an entrepreneur or just as an employee.
Thank you. Our last responder is Mr. Dickens. Again, this question is, as the city seems to see the water boys and water girls as a threat instead of an opportunity, what is a long-term solution to regulate and subsidize the water boys and water girls as legitimate entrepreneurs? You have 1 minute.
Yeah, the good thing about this city is everybody doesn't see things the same way. I don't see them as a threat. I do see them as an opportunity. I once was a water boy. We didn't sell bottled water back then because it didn't exist, but I sold Krispy Kremes, apples, candy, and a variety of other things in this organization called SWABO, Southwest Atlanta Youth Business Organization. It showed you profit and loss, how to manage your bank account. It helped you get a bank account. And we all saved money to go on a trip each summer and to be able to buy products to sell once again. And so I always had adult supervision when we were outside. And we learned a lot, so we knew business. So when the time came, I started my own business as an adult. So I think we have to add structure to it. And that's why I've been working with two organizations, HEY is Help Empowering Youth, and I Am a Father First. And we actually take water boys and been training them on how to sell t-shirts, print t-shirts, to do iPhone repairs, things that help them make income other than selling water. Because one day they're going to want to sell real estate, and I want to keep that ambition going.
Thank you. And now I'm going to introduce our rapid response format. So as a council member, you will be asked to vote on complex issues with a simple yes or no. Please answer the next 3 questions with a yes or no by selecting between those 2 options. You only have 5 seconds to respond, and we'll answer in alphabetical order by last name. So Mr. Brown will answer first, Mr. Dickens will answer second, and Ms. Moore will answer third. Our first rapid response question is, has there been an interest in unarming police officers for non-crisis calls? Yes or no?
I didn't understand the question. Sorry.
Has there been an interest in unarming police officers for non-crisis calls? Yes or no?
Absolutely. Yes.
I'm sorry
Dickens?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have another meeting that's starting and I've got to go next. So somebody's going, so I'm gonna unfortunately have to leave you all. But I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Mr. Dickens?
Yes.
Rapid response question 2 is, participatory budgeting is a democratic process in which community members decide how to spend part of a public budget. Would you commit to a citywide participatory budgeting initiative in which residents are engaged throughout the process? Yes or no?
Yes, we already have.
Yes, we already have.
Rapid response question 3 is, do you support the concept of universal basic income? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, and we're starting that too.
Yeah.
Rapid response question 4 is, do you support having youth having a more direct voice in decision making? Yes or no?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Rapid response question 6 is, would you support an ordinance that would mandate every city of Atlanta contract to allocate a percentage of jobs for that project to local residents? Yes or no?
Yes, we're already doing that.
Yes.
Thank you all. And now we can get into closing statements so you can go to your other commitments. And so you now have an opportunity to give a 1-minute closing statement. And we'll start with Mr. Dickens.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Rachel, you are phenomenal. Thank you. You really set the tone for what we're doing here today. And I think I'm excited for your future and the future of Atlanta youth. And thank you all for having this forum. You know, the mayor of the city of Atlanta will have a direct impact and indirect impact on what happens in the lives of our youth. I think this election is about equity, access, and opportunity. A lot of it is about public safety, but a whole lot of it is about the problems that we have in making sure that people are able to thrive in the city of Atlanta, not be forgotten or left behind. And so the youth tend to be a part of that conversation too, as we have youth that experience poverty, youth that experience homelessness. We didn't talk a lot about that, but it's about, somewhere in the 2,000 to 3,000 youth that are in fluctuation of housing, unsheltered at times. And so we really have to commit ourselves to having a school system and a city that works together to provide these solutions for the benefit of the whole. Because when we don't, we see all these challenges that people are talking about now, which are public health, public safety, and just people's hopelessness is on the rise when you don't give people an opportunity. So I'm really thankful for this conversation that we had, and I look forward to many, many more. Please vote for me as the next mayor of Atlanta, AndreForAtlanta.com.
Thank you, Mr. Dickens. And thank you for the compliment also. Mr. Brown, you may give your closing statement.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Rachel. I ditto what Councilmember Dickens said. You've been an incredible host, and thank you all for taking the opportunity to really put this together. I think it's important to empower our youth and ensure that they have a voice. I'm not going to really use my time to speak about why you should vote for me, but what I will say is that um, I hope that through this forum, it empowers our young people to really recognize the power that they have to affect change, generational change in our city. And I believe what is happening right now is a generational shift in leadership, and our young people are at the forefront of it. So if you ever for a second thought that your voice didn't matter or your vote didn't count, I was only elected to be the next city councilman in Atlanta by 3 votes. And, that just shows you the power that we all have in our vote and in our voice. So, don't be discouraged and continue to press forward. And, Councilmember Dickens and I are here to be a resource for you all if you ever need us. And to all of the folks that have lifted you all up to allow this to be successful, thank you. Because these youth are standing on your shoulders as you stand on other shoulders. So this is an incredible opportunity, and I'm grateful to have been able to spend it with you all this evening.
Thank you all for coming, and you may excuse yourselves to your other commitments tonight. You have another forum to get to, and we enjoyed you all's presence, and we appreciate you all's presence. Thank you all for showing up, not only to this forum, but to all of the other forums that you have been involved in. And good luck in your race to the mayorship.